In this tutorial, we'll set up the assessment module so we can assess and record professional judgments against the EYFS framework. You can see the front end of the assessment books and how to make professional judgments in one of the other video tutorials in this current series. You can follow these steps to assess any of your frameworks, whether they're skills-based frameworks such as literacy, numeracy, so on, or whether they're sets of personalised learning intentions or targets. And the assessment module is included with all cloud subscriptions. To activate the assessment module, please get in touch at www.evidenceforlearning.net/assessment. So we'll assume your framework is already in the cloud and your device is activated and paired. From the launch screen, we'll navigate to the Cloud Admin menu. The app is designed so that evidence can be captured by anyone with access to the app. You don't need to log in, and you can even be offline. The reason being, you can gather evidence quickly and easily and in the moment. However, when it comes to summative assessment and recording judgments, it's critical that you have accountability and that only authorised staff can access and record judgments. So the first thing we need to do is to set up authorised users to access and record judgments. So scroll down and tap Assessment Users, and then let's tap the Add button in the top right. The role is optional, but all the other user details are required. You can allocate a username and specify whether to generate a password, which automatically generates the password and will email it to the user using the email you provide. And then tap Save. If you need to reset a password for a given user, tap on the user and then press Reset Password. That'll send a new auto-generated password to the email address specified. And repeat this for as many users as you need. You'll probably want to create an account for all teaching staff and leadership. We're now ready to make our frameworks accessible. The first thing we need to do is define the scale or continuum that we'll use to measure progress for our learners. We call these assessment aspects. So tap Assessment Aspects, and then let's tap the plus button in the top right. We'll call this aspect EYFS aspect. The aspect values are the points on the scale or the continuum, and we can create any values we need. The values can be words, ranges, numbers, percentages, and you can also have as many points on your scale or continuum as you need. So let's create an aspect value. We can specify a value name and shortcode and a score. You can set a display order, which lets you sequence each aspect value. And we can also choose a colour for that value. And then we tap Save. And if we want to delete an aspect value, we just swipe and tap Delete. To help you get started and give you ideas, you can use and adapt our preloaded scales according to your assessment model. For EYFS, there are a number of options we can use. We'll use this one, and the aspect values you define are automatically saved on the fly. In order to use this assessment aspect with a framework, we need to add it to an assessment schema. A schema is essentially a collection of aspects attached to your framework, making your framework accessible. From the Cloud Admin menu, tap Assessment Schemas, and then tap the plus button, and we'll call this one EYFS Schema. We can actually add up to 5 aspects to a schema, which means you potentially could assess any statement in your framework with up to 5 independent scales. In this case, we only need to use one. So in aspect 1, let's choose our assessment aspect. Because we're only assessing one aspect, we don't need to worry about the primary aspect feature. And tap back to return to the Cloud Admin menu. Now that we've defined our scale, we're ready to make our frameworks accessible. And now let's tap Assessment Frameworks, and then we'll tap the plus button in the top right. We're going to create an assessment framework for EYFS, which basically is an accessible version of the EYFS, against which we can record professional judgments. To do this, we take a framework, choose the statements or headings we want to assess, and then assign relevant assessment schema that will be used to make the assessments. So let's first set our framework, and we'll choose EYFS. Next, we'll create some assessment items, which will be the headings or the statements we want to assess. So let's tap the Add button in the top right. We could choose to assess any of the statements or headings or subheadings. And as usual, just tap the headings or statements you'd like to assess. And use the slider at the bottom to collapse the framework. This can make it easier to get to the statements or headings that you want. In this case, we only want to record judgments against the 17 learning aspects. So I've collapsed the framework, and now I can tap each learning aspect quite easily. And then tap Add to add the assessment items into the assessment framework. You can see them highlighted in green, and in this case I've ticked a couple of extras that we didn't need, so I'm going to swipe to delete those. Now let's return back to the assessment framework. Now we've chosen which bits of the framework we want to assess, we now have to specify the scale or the schema for each assessment item. We can highlight individual assessment items, or if we tap multi-select, we can select all assessment items at the same level. Then tap Assign in the top right, and we'll choose the EYFS schema we've just created. So for this assessment framework, we've specified EYFS, we've chosen the 17 assessment items, and we've specified the scale or aspect that we want to use to assess these items. So let's tap Status to make this assessment framework live. So now we have our assessment framework. And just to remind you, you can apply this approach to any of your frameworks. And we only ever need to set up an assessment framework once. We can reuse this year after year after year. So all we need to do now is set up our assessment book, and this will allow teaching staff to access and record judgments. So tap Assessment Books and then tap Add. Typically we'd create assessment book for each class. So let's call this Turtles EYFS. We need to pick the assessment items to include in this book. And we'll include all of the items, and then tap Save. Next, we'll specify which learners to add to this assessment book. And then we set permissions, which users can access the assessment book. And you may want to include leadership as well as class teachers. And the last thing we do is set it to live, and we're ready to start making assessments. Don't forget to take a look at one of the other videos in this series to learn how to use the assessment book to access and record judgments.